Hi everyone, you've chosen a really special day to join us on 33 Founders because we're here with the founders of Cover, Mark and Andrew. And Cover is an app that's eliminating the dreaded restaurant bill. So thanks so much for joining us, guys.
Great, thanks for having us.
So I saw this quote in an interview comment. If you own a restaurant in New York City and you're not using Cover, you're wasting time, money, and service talent. So we'll start out on a good note. With Cover, you guys are empowering restaurant owners and you're empowering diners to have an exceptional experience. Can you tell us what you're doing and why you're making the experience so great?
Sure. So our vision for Cover is we want you to walk into a restaurant, have a great meal, and then when you're done, the waiter comes by and says, "Would you like any coffee or tea?" You say, "No, we're all set." And they say, "Great. We hope to see you again soon." And that's it. Right? We don't want people sitting around at the end waiting for the check, and we don't want them on their phones replicating the bill process, saying, "Okay, you had this and I had this." What we want is for you to not even think about the transaction. Enjoy what really matters, which is the food, the company you share it with, the atmosphere, the ambiance, everything that makes dining great.
So how does the app actually work? Can you explain that to our viewers?
Sure. You have the app on your phone, you sign up, you put in your payment information. When you walk into the restaurant, the phone uses location and uses Bluetooth Low Energy to know that you're inside that specific restaurant. You press one button to say, like, "Hey, I'm here," and your friends can just press the same button to say, "Hey, I'm dining with Mark." And then when the server comes to your table, you say, "Hey, we're going to pay with Cover," and the server says, "Awesome." And then you put your phone away.
That's
and
it.
You, instead of being antisocial for the rest of the meal, you actually engage with people around the table with you. And then when you're done, you just get up and go. So there's no closing out. Just whenever you're ready, you can walk out of the restaurant. No one's going to chase you. You're just going to get a push notification saying, "Hey, here's your bill," and you'll get an email receipt.
Right, and the app is actually so easy to use that you've actually had people gone back and check that it actually worked. That's what we've read. So,
yeah, we've been paying the same way in restaurants since 1950 when Diners Club came out. So I think I'm a little surprised that they're like, "That's it? That's all I have to do?" But that's it.
It's phenomenal that you have an app that is almost too good to be true. So now,
everyone remembers the first time they took Uber, right? And like getting out of the car when you haven't paid for anything feels a little weird, and then it's addictive. Right after that time, you're like, "Oh, that's the best part about Uber."
Yep, I have to tip you. What? I don't. It's just stars. So now, how are you building habit-forming apps?
That's a really good question, especially because people only dine out twice a day at best. Most people, I think, outside of our crazy world, dine like once a day out, at least if they live in New York. And so driving in habit when it's a thing that you're only using once or twice a day is really tricky. I think the first piece of it is it's just got to be a really awesome experience, and we've really nailed that, right? So the first time you use it, it is super sticky, because if you go to another restaurant the next night and they don't take Cover, when you're stuck waiting for the check, you're just drumming your fingers like, "I shouldn't have to do this anymore." And so that's the first piece, is we can get the hooks in really deep just right out of the gate, because that first experience is really, really strong. After that, it's really been about the quality of the restaurants that we work with, right? Because we want you, when you're thinking, "Hey, what restaurant do I want to go to next?" We want you to pick one of the restaurants that we work with, and the best way for us to do that is have them be some of the best restaurants in the city, have them be well located so that they're nearby you, and then making sure, hey, you know what they are. So it's really across a bunch of channels. It's in the app, it's with notifications, it's over email, but saying to you, "Hey, these places that are awesome and are around you all the time are places where you can be using Cover."
Right, and it's not like you guys actually built this out of leap of faith assumptions. You worked with the restaurants for a full year to build the service. So what did you get out of your beta period?
I think that's a great point, right? Like, I think too many people start building technology first and then just sort of release it into the world, expecting businesses to jump on. And generally, that's a lot harder than building something for a specific, consumer in mind. And since it's only this one vertical of restaurants, we really got to work closely with them, run lots of tests, lots of different iterations of the app. And what we learned a lot about sort of setting tips. Our whole tipping behavior sort of came out of that test. And also just how important it is to convey to restaurants that we will actually take care of it. We do next day deposits. We know how to signal nightly, emails, and everything that was important to incorporate into their existing workflows. Right? You don't take the world sort of as a blank slate. There's all these existing infrastructure, and we learned how to fit into that system.
I think the other thing that it did really well is it allowed us to establish trust. right? So restaurants have a very healthy distrust of startups because over the last few years, they've had a whole bunch of things sold to them that didn't do them a lot of good. And so our beta period didn't resemble what the product is now. It wasn't, hey, 7 days a week, you can pay in these restaurants. It was one night a week at this one restaurant. Everyone go there and test. But what that allowed us to do was send restaurants meaningful business at times when they needed more tables and then prove to them that they were going to get paid the way we said that they would. And so when we came to them and said, hey, we're ready to do this full time, they didn't bat an eye. They were just like, oh yeah, like you guys have been doing this for months already. You're great. Like, let's just do it. And I think really that was a huge advantage for us, was getting 100%.
Right. And if I were in charge of your company, the most intimidating part to me would be worrying about not only business feedback, but the customers of that business. So how are you balancing B2B and B2C feedback?
Well, it's interesting. So look, when things go great, people go to a great restaurant, have a great time, we get a lot of sort of bonus sort of, impact because we didn't cook the food, we didn't do any of the hard work, but we get some of the credit because people are actually, enjoying their experiences, and then they associate that with us. And conversely, if you go and spend a lot of money on a meal that you don't enjoy and you pay with cover, it's entirely possible that everything went perfectly and you're in a bad mood at the end of the meal. And those are things that we just have to care about. We take customer support very seriously, right? This is people's money. And food and money are things that people have pretty strong opinions about, right? And so, we have to be very careful about that. So we spend time with our customers, and as well as the restaurants, right? Like, restaurants have a million things going on. They average about 80 different vendors. Just like just as a small business, we don't want to be the one that's constantly taking up all of their time and making headaches. We want to be the easiest people they work with. We want them to think, I wish all the people I had to deal with were as simple as this. I don't even have to think about them. They just take care of problems.
And then we build a lot of technology to allow us to do that without it being a ton of overhead. Because most of the time when you start hearing about those kinds of relationships, you're thinking, wow, it's a huge human investment. And it can be, but you can also be really smart to make it easy.
Right. So now let's say then that a customer complains and at the same time the restaurant complains. Which do you handle first?
We handle them both. Those are actually separate parts of the response cycle. But Andrew is right. We got to our first 100 restaurants with just one salesperson, right? That you don't need a giant army of people either on the phone or banging down doors. Building the right tools to service these accounts and to make sure that you have the information at your fingertips to make problems go away, that's by far the most important way to solve these problems.
I think the customer and the merchant aren't at conflict, right? So it's interesting to pose the question that way, because it's rare that the customer's complaint and the merchant's complaint aren't related, right? And so even just that, people are so used to payments companies being these monolithic things that you can't get a support person to talk to you and get anything to help. Like, any kind of question a customer or restaurant has is a thing that we can solve in a minute. And so a lot of what we're doing is just about saying, hey, like, being responsive. If a customer has a question, or like, we can just send an email back, like, yep, we're taking care of it. And that really does us a lot of good.
So I know both of you guys have already touched on this about your beta period, and everything had worked so well that they wanted you to come on board. But what about for new partnerships that say you're seeking, this week and next week? How do you approach restaurants with your technology and get them excited about it?
So I think there's multiple ways that people get sort of into the right channels for us to approach them. Through referrals, people will do a lot of inbound. They read about us, they hear about us. Other friends in the industry tell them, like, hey, we just started this. And sometimes it's just the matter of, hey, we saw a restaurant just opened, let's go introduce ourselves, even with a cold walk-in. But once we actually have made contact, I think our sales to restaurants, our ability to sort of pitch restaurants, relies on the fact that we have an incredible group of people currently using it. When you already are working with the top restaurants in a city, and this is true for New York and San Francisco, it just buys you so much trust. If we can say in New York, hey, we work with Momofuku and we work with Carbone, people say those are great places. Those are places everyone aspires to be like, or they consider their peers, right? And so they instantly gets people's attention to say, look, the top of the sort of the pile is already working with us, and you should be too. And from there, it's just explaining what we do and building a relationship that's no different than any other business sale.
How do you guys view competition on that note? Because I know there's some other companies who are literally trying to get the same restaurants you guys are working for.
Yeah, it's not a zero-sum game. It's interesting because there's a mix of both startups and giant companies in the space. we really focus on the value we provide to the restaurants, on the experience we provide for customers. And so far that pitch resonates pretty well with the restaurants we're talking to. Really the best way for us to compete in that market is to do what we do really well and continue to do it. So we're aware of what competition does, but we like to think that the product experiences out there have been moving towards what we've been doing, and meanwhile we're focused on moving that ahead and continuing to add really awesome restaurant partners everywhere.
And startups really shouldn't sweat the competition too much. Build the best possible product, continue to provide great relationships and great support to your customers, right? And build up a business, right? Instead of like focusing on who else is out there. No one's ever turned us off for the competition, and to us that means we're doing something right.
And speaking of pitching to customers, you also have a pretty amazing team of investors. How is pitching to them?
Fundraising is always it was great, right? It's really interesting because we combined two things that investors hate and then tried to start a company around it, right? Like investors hate two-sided markets and they hate small businesses and restaurants, right? Because they've had so many startups try and do it and struggle with it. And so we really like stacked the deck against ourselves. But on the other hand, you go in at their best, meeting with investors, like those pitch meetings are galvanizing, for the team, but also really informative. You get smart questions, you get forced to look at your business in ways that you haven't looked at it before. And the best ones, you come out having had a conversation where someone's talking to you about like, what are the things we can do to help to move your business forward? And so, we're super happy with the results of those conversations. But it's certainly, you have to kiss a lot of frogs?
Yes.
How they describe it?
Yeah, and Andrew's absolutely right? Like the advantage of working with great people, and we're thrilled with the investors we have, and the conversations that we had means they should really actually challenge you and push you and make your business better. And if fundraising isn't doing that, something has gone terribly wrong. If people aren't asking hard questions, they either don't believe in your business at all, or you're not talking to the right people.
So what do you think is the best way to answer that hard question, especially if you don't know the answer at the time?
So I don't know if there's a universal answer to that, considering how varied these questions could be. We got asked about slices of data that we know our business very well. But when people would ask us for very esoteric like analytics, they understand that we might not know that off the top of our head. Telling people you know the answer to a question about your own business that you don't know the answer to, these people take meetings all day, right? Investors are smart. They're going to see right through that. Obviously being honest up front, and when you don't like the answers, they might ask you a question, say, yeah, actually, those numbers are not great. Like that is one of the things that we are working on. Like failing to acknowledge shortcomings in your business means that you believe that there are none, and investors don't want to invest in idiots, right? Like they don't want to, like if you're an early stage company, you're not perfect, right? Like no one is perfect. And if you just answer everything with sort of an exaggerated half-truth, or if you just sort of pretend that you know the answer to things that clearly can't be right, any sophisticated investor would see through that.
Fundamentally, the question that investors are asking themselves is, can the people who are sitting in front of us actually deliver on what they're saying? Right, and the fact that you have to tell the right story and like have the right business underneath, that's taken for granted. That's actually not the hardest question. The hardest question is like, can these two clowns actually execute? And so it's more around that, and I think that matters even more than the content on the deck. It's like when they ask you the questions, can you put together a thoughtful answer and show that you've done the work so that they believe that you're going to be able to tackle all of the unknowns that are coming in the decade ahead of you.
So I know one of the biggest ways you guys want to use that funding is to grow your team. What are the most important traits you're looking for in potential hires?
Sure. So I think for me at least, and this is true for all hires, but specifically for anyone on the operations side, the most important and the hardest thing to screen for is being empathetic enough to understand that the person on the other side of a phone call or on the other side of an email might not understand what's happening, might be frustrated, might be upset, and to connect with them and be able to sort of make them feel better and trust cover. Right, that we will do the right thing, that we will take care of problems, we're going to make sure that if something isn't working, it's going to work, and if you're confused about something, we have an answer, right? And so that's very hard to test for. It is very hard to do that, and it's not to say we don't look at all. But when we do interviews, there's a lot of things we care about. But if I were to pick one trait, I think it's very hard when you're trying to develop a new product and deliver it into a marketplace. Most of your customers won't live and breathe what you're doing. It's like for them, you're just an app. You're just a new thing. And they might not be sure how something works, or they may do something differently than how it was intended to be used. And we have to understand that while we spend all day thinking about this, if you assume the other person on the other side of a conversation knows and thinks about it like you do, you're not going to make it very far in a startup.
I'll let that stand. That works for product too.
Yeah, because the exact same thing is true with developing a product. If you develop a product and you assume everyone is exactly like you will have no users.
So I know, Andrew, you tweeted that startup job titles are weird, and I definitely agree with that. So how do you view leadership on your team?
How do we view leadership on our team? That's a really good question. I think we start by trying to instill a sense of ownership on everyone in the company, right? So it's not that there's necessarily hierarchy, it's that everyone on the team is empowered to take ownership both of what their responsibilities are, but of anything else on the plate, and then they can just lead by example, right? And people follow behind them. We made one hire recently that was really like the first time we hired someone as specifically a leader. A guy named Frank Harris just joined us, who's like a phenomenal product designer with a long history. And what's great for us is like we get to watch somebody who's actually good at leading. Lead our product team, and in that really it's about helping people both know what their responsibilities are, but getting us all on the same page of, hey, look, these are still our incredibly lofty goals, which are things that Mark and I are always talking about, but that Frank day to day can be actually saying, hey, like let's keep these things in sight that we're going for. So I think part of it is being able to make sure that the team sees what we're aspiring to, and then actually being there to help get them to that point. And as the team grows, leadership is very much about that. It's about saying, hey, there are people around me, and we're all pushing really hard for this thing, and now let's like focus our effort to get the best results we can. I don't know, I've never had to answer that question.
Well, yeah, I mean, so we veered a little bit off titles. We wanted to create a culture where people jump at the opportunity to address something when it comes up. So if it looks like something isn't right, people say, I'm on it, as opposed to looking around for who's like responsible, like who has that in the org chart, right? Because like that's no way to run a company of 15 people. It's no way to run any company. People should feel ownership over the product at all levels. But they should also feel like excited about a chance to like actually address something and take some ownership over it.
The titles comment, like we actually don't use titles internally.
No.
No one on your website even.
Yeah, no one on the team has an official title. And that's just in part because, like, what does it mean to be like CTO or director of product or VP of marketing when there's like 3 of you, right? Presumably, you're going to hire somebody else down the road who might be more senior.
Yeah, our titles are still just co-founder. We use titles externally to help job seekers find things that might be a good fit for them. It's a heuristic like anything else, right? Like if you're looking for a specific role, you shouldn't have to read tons of job descriptions to figure out what that role is. But internally, we all see ourselves as team members.
But like if the chief cat wrangler from some previous company wanted to apply for a job with us, we're like, what are we supposed to do?
Yeah, deputy vice ninja of tech, right?
That's a good one.
What about when reaching out though through email? Should you have it in your signature so people know who they're talking to and where they are in the company?
So generally, we hope that anyone who represents our company externally has enough responsibility and authority to take care of anything, and that we express that to customers and to restaurants as well.
Right. That's an easy thing to stick in the body of an email, and it feels way more human.
Right. So, I mean, all of this kind of reminds me a lot of something that I just read by Jeff Bezos, and that was when people at Amazon started saying they needed to communicate more within the company. He shocked everyone by saying, no, communication is terrible. So, and this is kind of to go against the whole groupthink that you were talking about, where you'd prefer there's an ownership mentality with everyone there. So, how are you like that or different then?
We communicate a lot.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the hardest things for startups to keep doing well as they grow. And certainly, as we've gone from, like, we were 7 full-time people in March or something, and now we're 13, and we're going to be 25 soon. That's a thing that actually, for us to operate efficiently, takes a lot. I think there are types of communication that, can be tampered down and improve efficiency, right? And some things are better documented in GitHub than in emails or in HipChat and things like that.
And also, this is another time when internal tools are extremely important, right? Like to have everything in a structured format accessible to the team, so that if you have to jump in midstream, you can see everything that's happened, all the communications up to a certain point, so that you can sort of step in and fix something, right? That's extremely important. And if everything is held together by like duct tape and paper clips, you're not going to be able to actually communicate well. Because if you weren't in the room, then all that information is lost.
So email is the death of a company?
We're not one of those people who've killed emails. I think email is a perfectly fine way to communicate. We use a bunch of different tools. It's sort of use whatever tool makes sense. I don't know. I have a hard time believing that like having like these big like bans on X are the way to go, right? Like find what works for you and sort of run with it.
We do all the internal communications through Yo.
That's perfect. So you mentioned that you guys got your inspiration from Uber. Let's say that we're sitting down at a restaurant in New York, we're paying with Cover, and Travis just came down to sit with us. What would you ask him about how he scaled the business?
That's a great question.
Yeah, we have a ton of respect for Travis and for what they're doing at Uber.
Yeah.
I mean, just at a very fundamental level, my question is how does he actually plan out which cities to go to and how to scale them up? Right? You know, we've done that with one other city. We're planning our next few. But like Uber, there is no playbook for this. Uber is really the first company that's gone from 1, 2 to many cities very, very fast without a drop in quality. Yeah. Right? And that's the hard thing. We have a different business. They don't have to pick, like there's not like a ranking of black car drivers that they have to worry about. There aren't Michelin stars for, taxis, right? So we have a very different business. But I'd be very curious as to how he learned to do that because, again, no one has done that. Before Uber, it's very hard to point to any company that did that successfully in a two-sided market.
I really want to know how, when they start a new city, how they bootstrap it to still be Uber, right? Like it has Uber's branding, but how do you take these brand new people that you just hired up in the city, unless you like had a starter batch from a previous city, and instill them with all things Uber, such that when they build out that city, it feels like the same unified piece as the rest of Uber.
Yeah, I think on his expansion model, he'd definitely say go to San Diego first, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah.
I hear the weather's terrible this time of year.
All of the Gaslamp district.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll be ready for Comic-Con.
So now your biggest focus is on building density then. Why is it more important to go deep into local markets instead of having just a few restaurants in every city?
You asked earlier about being habit forming. I think the best way for it to be habit forming is to give customers more opportunity to use it more often. And so that's really what penetration is about. It's about saying, hey, we don't want you to use it once and then not use it again until like your next anniversary dinner. Like I want you to be using this, every night that you dine out, and the best way to do that is to go deep. That said, you can go deep and go wide in parallel. Yeah. Because the things that you do to go deep in one city, you can be doing while you're going wide into other ones. So, and then the learnings from both benefit each other. So, like I said, if we're going to make this be a daily habit, going deep is the focus there, but
right.
And start ramping up other things.
And once you figure out how to do that sustainably, you can scale it up in a number of cities all at once.
All right. And I'm just curious, do you think the rise of restaurant apps will ever make waitresses and waiters obsolete? Should they be afraid for their jobs or what?
So look, there's a whole wide range of things, but it won't be covered, right? We believe very strongly that when you go out to eat, you expect to actually have service, right? That's why you're going out and spending your hard-earned money. And there are some people who want to put tablets on every table and that you order through the tablets and waitstaff just become glorified bussers at best. And they might even one day just have like, everything looks like a conveyor belt sushi restaurant where it just brings out your food. That's not the world we want to live in, and that's not the world we're building, right? Like, it's just worth noting that like, you don't order through Cover. You will not order through Cover. You talk to a human being, and that's the waiter or waitress. And you say, is this very garlicky, or what wine would you recommend? And no app is ever going to replace that.
I like it. And there's actually a lot of psychology behind the app that people tip more because they've had such an enjoyable experience. Do you think that this mentality, the mentality behind Cover, can be applied to other industries?
Sure, absolutely. Look, fundamentally, if you give people better experiences, they're going to be happier customers. This is what running a business is all about, right? And when you walk into a restaurant, it doesn't feel like you're walking into Walmart. You don't feel like this is a commercial exchange of money for goods and services. You feel like you're getting treated well. If you treat people well, they're happier, and happier customers spend more and they come back more. And this is true for a lot of things. This is true from, small businesses all across the country. This is true for barber shops. This is true for coffee shops, right? Like, we don't work in those verticals, but you better believe that giving people special, personalized, better service makes them happier customers. That's why people do this.
And then there's just the benefit of removing friction, right? Like
Yeah.
the smartphone in your pocket has enough sensors that you can remove a whole lot of friction. And we customize for restaurants. There's a whole bunch of other opportunities to customize for.
Think about how annoying it would be if you had to write a physical check every time you conducted business, right? You would not be a happy customer and you would not get well.
I definitely agree with that. And right now, you guys are in San Francisco and New York, like we've said. But what can we expect for the next 12 months?
More restaurants and more places.
Yes, and a lot, and certainly in the next 12 months, we'll be expanding far beyond those two cities.
I like it. So personally, for the two of you, what's one restaurant you'd like to see cover in? Anywhere in the country.
Anywhere in the country.
So I think it's a city that we're not in yet. One of the best meals I've ever had is in a restaurant in Washington, D.C. called Coney. It's on 17th Street, and it's just beyond spectacular. In fact, when I think about what good service looks like, often I think back to my meals there.
How about you, Andrew?
Is it going back to that Florida restaurant?
That's a really good question. So there's a place in LA called Jelena on Abbot Kinney.
I've been right by there. I used to live by there.
I did some time in LA and love it still, and that would be a fun get.
Did some time to make it sound like prison.
Yeah, LA
on the doing hard labor.
LA feels like home, so it's fun. There's honestly that question is so hard now because now I just look around and every food thing I read, I'm like, all right, it's gonna be there. It's gonna be there soon. I was just in Paris, and I got stuck waiting for checks every restaurant I was at in Paris. So who knows what's next.
Well, we'll keep it at that, and we'll be excited to keep everyone posted about your guys' new expansions.
Well, thank you.
Thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you guys.